He looked straight at me across the glass conference table, tapping his finger on the report I'd spent 4 nights perfecting. "She's a typist," he told the board, as if I wasn't sitting there. I stayed silent, but I knew what he didn't. The $920,000 audit assessment his assistant had ignored was in my possession, and one board member had asked me to forward a copy if things went too far. That day, he wrote his own termination letter. "My name is Dana Whitmore, and I've spent 11 years building something most people can't even see, the invisible architecture that keeps a billion-dollar company from imploding. As head of internal compliance at Evandrel Systems, I don't make products or close deals. I make sure the products we ship won't kill anyone, and the deals we close won't land us in federal court." The morning Chase Larkin called me a typist. I'd arrived at the Minneapolis headquarters at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours before the quarterly board meeting. The November sky was still dark, and the building's glass facade reflected the city lights like a mirror. I remember thinking how appropriate that was. We spent so much time reflecting other people's expectations back at them. Chase had been CEO for exactly 93 days. I know because I'd been counting. He came from the finance world, one of those golden boys who'd made his fortune betting against subprime mortgages while families lost their homes. The board brought him in to streamline operations and maximize shareholder value, corporate speak for cutting everything that didn't show immediate profit. In those 93 days, he'd already eliminated the ethics hotline redundant, reduced the compliance team by 40% right-sizing, and started referring to my department as the expensive speed bump. But I'd survived 4 CEOs and 2 major SEC investigations. I knew how to weather storms. The conference room on the 32nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Mississippi River. I'd prepared a comprehensive risk assessment that identified several critical vulnerabilities in our new manufacturing process, the kind that could result in catastrophic failure and hundreds of millions in liability. 4 consecutive nights I'd spent cross-referencing safety data, incident reports, and regulatory requirements. My team had verified every calculation twice. I was presenting slide 17 when Chase interrupted. "Let me stop you there," he said, not even looking at me, but at his phone. "Board members, I think we need to discuss resource allocation. Do we really need someone reading regulations to us? She's essentially a glorified typist, documenting what real professionals have already decided." The room went silent. Through the glass table, I could see my reflection navy suit, pearls my grandmother left me, the same poker face I'd perfected during my first deposition 12 years ago. Margaret Chen, our CFO, suddenly found her portfolio fascinating. James Wright, our chief legal officer, the man who'd personally thanked me for saving his ass during the FDA audit last year, was studying the ceiling tiles. But Veronica Halden, the longest-serving board member, was watching me. Her expression was unreadable, but I remembered our conversation 2 years ago when I'd brought her evidence of financial irregularities. "Keep that close," she'd said then. "Sometimes the best weapon is patience." "A typist," Chase repeated, finally looking at me with the kind of smile that probably worked on junior analysts and restaurant hostesses. "No offense, Dana, but anyone can read regulations and type up reports. We need people who add value, not people who document what others create." I set down my laser pointer, placed my hands flat on the table, counted 3 breaths, a technique I learned during the hostile takeover attempt in 2019. "Of course," I said, my voice steady as Minnesota ice. "I understand your perspective completely." What Chase didn't know, what his Harvard MBA and Wall Street connections hadn't taught him, was that in 11 years, I'd built more than just a compliance department. I'd built a network. I'd built trust. And most importantly, I'd built a paper trail. In my locked desk drawer, 3 floors below, inside a folder marked Insurance, lay a $920,000 audit report that his executive assistant, Brittany, had marked as received but never forwarded. An audit that detailed questionable allocations, creative accounting, and a particularly interesting pattern of expenses that coincided with Chase's hiring. Veronica Halden had asked me to keep that report safe. "If things go too far," she'd said. I'd always wondered what too far looked like. Now I knew. It looked like a conference room full of cowards, a CEO who confused intimidation with leadership, and 11 years of my work being reduced to typing. "Shall I continue with the presentation?" I asked. Chase waved his hand dismissively. "I think we've heard enough. The board can review your typing at their leisure." I gathered my materials, maintaining eye contact with each board member as I did. Most looked away, but Veronica gave the slightest nod. So subtle Chase, busy pontificating about dynamic resource utilization, missed it entirely. Walking out of that room, my heels clicking against the marble floor, I made my decision. Chase Larkin thought he'd just put a typist in her place. He had no idea he'd just started a war. The audit report that would end Chase Larkin's career began with a $37 discrepancy in the R&D budget 2 years ago. Most people would have written it off as a rounding error, but I've learned that in corporate finance, there are no rounding errors, only the first drops of a very deep leak. It was January, one of those Minneapolis winters where the air hurt your face and the parking lot became a skating rink. I was reviewing quarterly expenditures when I noticed it $37 allocated to miscellaneous research materials, with no corresponding purchase order, by itself, meaningless. But I'd been doing this long enough to know that small anomalies often signal larger patterns. Over the next 3 months, I found more. 100 here, 300 there. Always small amounts, always tagged to projects that were either canceled or so deeply buried in subsidiary budgets that no one would think to look. By April, I was looking at nearly $40,000 in questionable allocations. I brought it to our CFO at the time, Robert Henley. He listened, nodded, then leaned back in his leather chair. "Dana," he said, "you're very good at your job, maybe too good. Some stones are better left unturned. But I've never been good at leaving stones unturned. It's a character flaw that served me well." That's when I called Linda Ray. Linda had spent 15 years with the SEC before going private. She was expensive, discreet, and thorough. The kind of auditor who could find a paperclip missing from a supply closet in 2018 and tell you who took it. More importantly, she owed me a favor from when I'd helped her daughter get an internship at Evandrel. "Off the books," she asked when I explained what I needed. "Parallel track," I corrected. "Consider it insurance." For 6 months, Linda and her team conducted a shadow audit. They worked nights and weekends, careful never to trigger our internal systems or alert the finance department. What they found made that $37 discrepancy look like a joke. $920,000. That was the total, not stolen. Exactly, Chase was too smart for outright theft. Instead, it was redistributed through a maze of project codes, vendor payments, and consulting fees. The money hadn't left Evandrel, but it had been moved around like shells in a con game, making certain departments look more profitable while hiding losses in others. The most damning part. The shuffling had started 3 months before Chase was hired. Someone had been preparing the books to make certain divisions appear more attractive to cost-cutting. Guess which divisions suddenly looked like dead-weight compliance, internal audit, and quality assurance, all the departments that might have caught this earlier. Linda delivered her final report on a Thursday evening in October. 230 pages of documentation, cross-referenced and verified. "This is bulletproof," she said, sliding the bound document across my desk. "But Dana, you need to be careful. This kind of thing, it's not just about money, it's about power." I took the report to Veronica Halden the next day. We met at her house in Edina, away from office politics and potential surveillance. She read it slowly, her expression growing harder with each page. "How many copies?" she asked finally. 3, you have one, I have one, and Linda has one in her safe. Chase's assistant, Brittany, she's been intercepting reports. Nothing official, but I've noticed delays in board communications since he arrived. Veronica set down her reading glasses. "I want you to send this through normal channels. Let's see what happens." What happened was nothing. I sent the report to Chase's office on November 2nd. Brittany signed for it at 2:45 p.m. It never made it to Chase's desk, never appeared on any board agenda, never triggered a single follow-up question. But I kept the receipt, and the email confirmation, and the security footage of Brittany accepting the package. "Keep it safe," Veronica told me during our next unofficial meeting. "If things go too far, if he crosses a line, you'll know what to do." For 2 years, I'd sat on evidence that could reshape Evandral's entire leadership structure. I'd watched Chase eliminate good people, gut essential departments, and transform our culture from one of innovation to one of fear. But I'd waited, because premature moves in corporate warfare are usually fatal. Then he called me a typist. Sitting in my office after that board meeting, I unlocked my desk drawer and pulled out the report. The pages were still crisp, the data still damning. I thought about all the people Chase had dismissed, belittled, or forced out. I thought about Veronica's words, "You'll know what to do." I opened my secure email account, the one IT didn't know about, and began typing a message to Veronica Halden. The subject line was simple: "Regarding our previous discussion." The attachment was 230 pages of corporate kryptonite. Before hitting send, I looked out my window at the Minneapolis skyline. Somewhere up there, Chase Larkin was probably celebrating his successful board meeting, thinking he'd put another obstacle in its place. He had no idea that this particular typist had just finished typing his corporate obituary. The email to Veronica went out at 4:17 p.m. By 4:20, I had a response. "Received. Stand by." I spent the next hour cleaning out my desk. Not obviously, I wasn't packing boxes or carrying out plants, but I quietly removed personal items, backed up essential files to my private cloud, and deleted anything that wasn't strictly business from my computer. After 11 years, I could feel the winds shifting. My resignation letter was simple, professional, and gave nothing away. After considerable reflection, I have decided to pursue other opportunities. My last day will be in 2 weeks, pending transition of responsibilities. I printed it, signed it, and walked it up to HR myself. Patricia in HR looked surprised. "Dana, is everything all right? This seems sudden." "Sometimes the right moment chooses you," I said, handing her the letter. By the next morning, my resignation had been processed with unusual speed. My 2 weeks' notice was waived to allow for a smooth transition, the email said. I was to be out by end of business Friday. No exit interview requested, no knowledge transfer meeting scheduled, just a clean, quiet exit. Chase never said goodbye. His assistant sent a 2-line email. "Thank you for your service to Evandral. Best wishes in your future endeavors." But while they were efficiently erasing me from the building, something else was happening in the boardroom. I learned later from Veronica that the audit report had triggered an emergency conference call that evening. She'd forwarded it not just to the board, but to Evandral's external legal counsel with a simple note: "This requires immediate attention." The lawyers understood what Chase apparently didn't, that sitting on a report of this magnitude wasn't just bad judgment, it was potential liability. Every board member who'd been informed and failed to act could be personally exposed. Suddenly, being Chase's ally looked a lot less attractive than being on the right side of a financial investigation. My last day was surreal. I arrived to find my access already restricted to common areas only. Security issued me a temporary badge that would expire at 5 p.m. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I'd gone from trusted insider to potential threat overnight. But I wasn't the only one feeling the heat. Through the glass walls of the executive floor, I could see unusual activity. Legal counsel huddled in conference rooms. Board members who rarely visited were suddenly present. Chase's assistant, Brittany, looked like she'd aged 5 years overnight, scurrying between offices with stacks of documents. At lunch, James Wright found me in the cafeteria. The chief legal officer, who'd avoided eye contact during my humiliation, sat down uninvited. "Donna," he began, then stopped, started again. I should have said something during the meeting. I sipped my coffee, waited. "The board is asking questions about the audit report. Brittany says she never received it, but..." He leaned forward, lowered his voice. "There's a record, electronic signature, security footage. She's changing her story every hour. That must be stressful, I said neutrally. Chase is saying you fabricated it, that you're a disgruntled employee trying to cause trouble on your way out. He watched my face. But Veronica Halden has a copy that predates your resignation by 2 years. I set down my cup carefully. James, are you wearing a wire? His face flushed. No, God, no. I wanted you to know that some of us see what's happening, that we're not all cowards, I supplied. He had the grace to look ashamed. Yeah. I stood up, gathered my tray. Tell Chase something for me. Tell him that typists are very good at documentation. We keep copies of everything, and we always spell check our work. By 3 p.m., the atmosphere in the building was electric. Through the internal chat system I still had access to for another 2 hours. I could see the panic spreading. Emergency meetings were being called. The external auditors had arrived, not just 1 or 2, but a full team. They'd commandeered the large conference room on 27. At 4:45, 15 minutes before my access expired, I sent one final email. It went to my personal list, the people who'd been marginalized, overlooked, or pushed out by Chase's regime. The subject line read, "Regarding recent developments." The body was brief. It appears that comprehensive documentation does indeed add value. Thank you all for your professionalism during difficult times. The truth has a way of surfacing, especially when properly typed and filed. I attached no documents, made no accusations, but everyone on that list understood. The typist had typed, the files had been filed, and Chase Larkin was about to learn that in corporate America, the person who controls the paperwork controls the game. At 5 p.m., exactly, I handed my temporary badge to security and walked out of Evandrel Systems for what I thought was the last time. The November air was crisp, winter coming early to Minneapolis. Behind me, 32 floors up, an empire was beginning to crumble. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A text from Veronica. Emergency board session called for Tuesday evening. Your presence will be requested as an independent consultant. Are you available? I sat in my car for a moment, watching the building I'd spent 11 years in become just another part of the skyline. Then I typed back. My consulting rate is triple my former salary, plus expenses. Her response was immediate, accepted. I drove home through rush hour traffic, already planning my next moves. Chase thought he'd gotten rid of a problem employee, a mere typist who'd outlived her usefulness. He was about to discover he'd simply changed my job title, from compliance officer to corporate undertaker, and I was very, very good at my job. Tuesday evening arrived with the kind of November rain that turns Minneapolis into a noir film. I dressed carefully, my best suit, the one I'd bought for congressional testimony 3 years ago, conservative, expensive, unmistakably professional, the kind of outfit that said expert witness, not typist. The Evandrel building looked different from the visitor's entrance. For 11 years, I'd swept through with my employee badge, belonging without question. Now security scrutinized my driver's license, called upstairs for confirmation, issued me a visitor badge that had to be displayed at all times. The transformation from insider to outsider was complete, and somehow that made me more powerful. Veronica met me in the lobby herself, unusual for a board member. "Thank you for coming," she said, then lowered her voice. "It's been an interesting few days." The elevator ride to 32 was silent, but I could read the tension in her shoulders, the way she checked her phone every few seconds. When we reached the executive floor, I understood why. The boardroom was full, not just the usual suspects, but lawyers, laws of lawyers. I recognized Evandrel's general counsel, but there were at least 6 others I didn't know, external firms, judging by their visitor badges. At the far end of the table sat Chase, his usual swagger notably absent. Beside him, Brittany clutched a legal pad like a life preserver. "Ms. Whitmore," Veronica announced, "is here as an independent consultant to help us understand certain documentation and procedures." I took the seat indicated directly across from Chase. For the first time since that disastrous meeting, we made eye contact. His expression was carefully neutral, but I'd spent years reading faces across conference tables. He was scared. The lead external counsel, a woman named Sandra Keene, didn't waste time on pleasantries. Ms. Whitmore, we've reviewed the audit report dated October 23rd, 2023. Can you walk us through how this document came to exist? For the next hour, I laid out the entire story, the initial discrepancy, the pattern of misallocations, my attempts to raise concerns through proper channels, the decision to commission an independent audit, every word calm, factual, supported by documentation I'd brought in my briefcase. And this report was submitted to Mr. Larkin's office, Sandra asked. November 2nd, 2023, 2:45 p.m. Received and signed for by Brittany Marshall. I produced the receipt, the email confirmation, the security footage timestamp. Brittany's face had gone pale. I must have. There were so many documents that day. Did you or did you not receive this report? Sandra's voice was sharp. Yes, but Mr. Larkin said it wasn't a priority. He said to file it with the other non-essential compliance documents. The room erupted, board members talking over each other, lawyers conferring in urgent whispers. Through it all, Chase sat frozen, watching his assistant destroy his career with every word. Sandra called for order. Mr. Larkin, did you instruct Ms. Marshall to bury this report? I've never seen that document before in my life, Chase said firmly, too firmly, the kind of denial that sounds rehearsed. I reached into my briefcase again. I have here an email thread from November 3rd, the day after the report was delivered. Mr. Larkin asked Brittany to handle that compliance thing quietly and ensure it didn't distract from quarterly projections. How do you have that? Chase demanded, half rising from his chair. Brittany CC'd me by accident. She meant to forward it to your personal email but hit reply all instead. It happens when you're managing too many documents. I looked at him steadily. Even typists make mistakes sometimes. The email was damning, not just for the instruction to bury the report, but for what followed: a discussion of which departments could absorb the hidden losses, which board members were problems, and a casual mention that once I was dealt with, they could restructure the entire compliance framework. This is entrapment, Chase said, but his voice lacked conviction. This is documentation, Sandra corrected. Ms. Whitmore, is there anything else the board should know? I considered carefully. I had more, so much more, but sometimes the most effective attack is knowing when to stop. Only that I've been asked to provide a restructuring plan for compliance and risk management. I'll need full access to financial records from the past 3 years and cooperation from all department heads. My preliminary estimate is that implementing proper controls will take 6 months and require significant investment. I paused. Of course, the alternative is continuing with the current system and hoping the SEC doesn't notice what I noticed with a $37 discrepancy. The board exchanged glances. The choice between expensive prevention and catastrophic cure wasn't really a choice at all. Mr. Larkin, Veronica said quietly, I think we need to discuss your future with Avandrel. What followed was the corporate equivalent of an execution. The board suspended Chase pending a full investigation. His signing authority was revoked immediately. Brittany was placed on administrative leave. Control of the audit process was transferred to a special committee, with me as their primary advisor. As security escorted Chase out the same security who'd scrutinized my visitor badge, he stopped beside my chair. You planned this, he said quietly. From the moment I called you a typist. I looked up at him, this golden boy who'd thought corporate America was his playground. No, Chase, I planned this from the moment you decided compliance was a speed bump. You just gave me a reason to execute. He left without another word. Through the boardroom windows, I watched the rain blur the city lights into abstract patterns. Somewhere out there, Chase Larkin was learning what every successful corporate player eventually discovers: the person who documents history controls it. Ms. Whitmore, Sandra Keene said, bringing me back to the room. We'll need you to start immediately. Are you prepared for that? I smiled for the first time in days. I've been prepared for 2 years. The meeting continued for another hour, but the real business was done. Chase was out. I was in. And everyone in that room understood the new reality that the typist they dismissed had just rewritten Evandrel's entire power structure. With properly documented evidence and perfect spelling, of course, Chase Larkin didn't go quietly into the night. By Thursday morning, 2 days after his suspension, the internal rumor mill was churning with his version of events. According to the whispers that reached me through former colleagues, I was a bitter, vindictive employee who'd fabricated evidence after being rightfully criticized. He'd hired a PR firm, a small one, but aggressive to control the narrative. The first salvo came through an anonymous post on an industry blog. Source inside Evandrel Systems claims recent leadership shakeup driven by disgruntled former employee with axe to grind. It was carefully worded to avoid libel, but the implications were clear. Then came the legal threats. A courier delivered the letter to my home at 8:15 a.m. on Friday. Chase's personal attorney, not Evandrel's lawyers, I noticed was putting me on notice for tortious interference and defamation. The letter demanded I cease all consulting work with Evandrel and retract any statements made about Mr. Larkin. I read it over coffee, almost admiring the desperation. He was drowning and grabbing at anything that looked like a life preserver. I called Sandra Keene. I assume you've seen the blog post. We have. Legal is drafting a response. But Dana, there's something else. Chase is claiming you had unauthorized access to executive communications. He's suggesting corporate espionage. I actually laughed. Brittany CC'd me on internal communications by mistake. I have the entire email chain showing it originated from her account. Besides, I'm now under contract as an official consultant with full access privileges. Any documentation I possess is either public record, accidentally shared with me, or covered by my current engagement. That's what I told the board. But Chase is making noise about filing a complaint with the SEC. He's claiming the audit report was fabricated, that Linda Ray was paid to create false documentation. This was where Chase had miscalculated. Linda Ray hadn't built her reputation by being sloppy. Every piece of data in that audit was triple verified, every source documented, every calculation reviewed by her team. She'd testified in federal court dozens of times. Her work was bulletproof because it had to be. Let him file, I said. In fact, I hope he does. Discovery would be fascinating. That afternoon, the narrative began to shift. Veronica Halden, in her capacity as lead board member, released a carefully worded internal statement. It didn't mention Chase by name, but it confirmed that financial irregularities had been discovered through proper internal channels, and that the board was taking all necessary steps to ensure full compliance with regulatory requirements. By evening, Chase's PR offensive was faltering. 3 reporters who'd been pitched the disgruntled employee story had instead started asking questions about the $920,000. The business press smelled blood in the water, and nothing attracts journalists like financial misconduct at a publicly traded company. Then Chase made his biggest mistake. He called me directly. It was 9:43 Pasantun Sem. I was reviewing financial documents for the restructuring plan when my personal cell rang. Unknown number, but I had a feeling. Hello, Chase? Silence. Then, we need to talk. Are your lawyers aware you're calling me? Forget the lawyers. This is between us. His voice had lost its usual polish. He sounded tired, desperate. What do you want? Money, your job back, a promotion. I have a job. Chase, consultant to the board. The pay is excellent. This isn't a game. Dana, you're destroying everything I've built. I set down my pen, gave him my full attention. What you built was a house of cards constructed on hidden losses and manipulated numbers. I'm not destroying it. I'm documenting its collapse. I could have made Evandrel great, efficient, profitable, by gutting compliance, by hiding nearly $1 million in misallocated funds, by creating a culture where people are afraid to report problems. You don't understand how business works at this level. I understand exactly how it works. I've been watching for 11 years. The difference between you and me, Chase, is that I document what I see. His breathing was audible through the phone. The blog post was a mistake. I'll retract it. Call off the lawyers. We can make this go away. It's too late for that. The SEC has questions. The board wants answers. And somewhere, there's a forensic accounting team preparing to go through 3 years of financial records with a microscope. Because you couldn't handle being called a typist. The sneer was back in his voice. That's what this is about. Your ego. I thought about all the people he'd dismissed, belittled, driven out. The good employees who'd left because they couldn't work for someone who saw them as expendable. The departments he'd gutted. The culture he'd poisoned. No, Chase, this is about accountability. You thought you could reshape Evandrel in your image-cut corners. Hide problems, silence dissent. You thought the people who maintain the guardrails were obstacles to remove. I paused. You were wrong. I'll fight this. I have resources. You have a suspended corporate credit card and a legal team that's about to realize you can't pay their retainer. Brittany already flipped. Did you know that? She's providing documentation to the board in exchange for immunity. Apparently, you weren't very nice to her either. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, quietly, I could have been great. You could have been honest. It's easier in the long run. He hung up without another word. I stared at my phone for a moment, then blocked his number. There would be no more late-night calls, no more desperate bargaining. Chase Larkin was finished at Evandrel, and we both knew it. Monday's business news confirmed it. Evandrel Systems CEO suspended amid financial probe. The stock dipped 3% in early trading before recovering. The market, it seemed, had more faith in transparency than in Chase's leadership. By Tuesday afternoon, Brittany had provided the board with 47 emails documenting Chase's systematic efforts to bury the audit report, intimidate potential whistleblowers, and manipulate financial presentations. Her immunity deal, Sandra Keene told me, was contingent on full cooperation. She's terrified, Sandra said during our afternoon meeting. Apparently, Chase threatened to destroy her career if she ever contradicted him. I thought about Brittany, 26, ambitious, caught between loyalty and survival. Make sure she has protection, and maybe suggest she look into compliance as a career path. We could use people who understand the cost of looking the other way. The investigation was gaining momentum, and Chase's threats were becoming increasingly hollow. His attorney had stopped returning calls. His PR firm had quietly dropped him as a client. The corporate execution was nearly complete. But I knew Chase. He'd built his career on bold moves and calculated risks. He wouldn't fade away quietly. There would be one more play, one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. I was right, but even I didn't anticipate how desperate that final move would be. The emergency board meeting was called for 7 p.m. on a Wednesday, unusual timing that signaled something serious. I arrived at 6:30 to find the executive floor in chaos. Security guards stationed at every entrance, legal counsel huddled in glass offices, board members who normally phoned in from New York or Chicago physically present, their faces grim. Veronica intercepted me at the elevator. We have a situation. Chase has been reaching out to major shareholders directly, claiming the board is orchestrating a coup. He's promising them restored dividends if they pressure us to reinstate him. How many are listening? More than we'd like. He's also threatened to go public with what he calls selective enforcement of compliance standards. Says he has evidence that previous leadership did worse. She guided me toward a small conference room. We need a comprehensive remediation plan. Tonight, something that shows we're serious about reform. I'd been preparing for this. In my briefcase was a 70-page restructuring proposal that would fundamentally reshape Evandrel's governance structure. Independent oversight, mandatory rotation of audit firms, whistleblower protections that actually meant something. It would be expensive and disruptive, but it would also be bulletproof. I have something, I said. But the board needs to understand this isn't cosmetic. This is surgery. The main boardroom was packed when we entered. 12 board members, 8 lawyers, 2 representatives from our largest institutional investors, and enough tension to cut with a knife. Chase's empty chair at the head of the table seemed to dominate the room. Sandra Keene called the meeting to order. As you know, we've been conducting a thorough investigation into financial irregularities. The forensic team has uncovered additional issues. She nodded to a young analyst who looked like he'd aged years in the past week. He pulled up a presentation that made my original findings look like a parking ticket. Total misallocated funds now exceed $2.3 million, he said. The pattern goes back 5 years, predating Mr. Larkin, but accelerating dramatically under his leadership. We've identified 17 suspect transactions, 43 improper classifications, and systematic manipulation of quarterly reports. The room erupted. Board members who'd supported Chase were suddenly studying their phones. The institutional investors were taking furious notes. Through it all, I noticed one person sitting quietly in the corner, Linda Ray, my shadow auditor, looking vindicated and exhausted. Furthermore, the analyst continued, Mr. Larkin attempted to access corporate systems remotely yesterday evening. IT security blocked him, but he tried multiple times using various credentials, including those of current employees. That's a federal crime, someone muttered. Sandra raised her hand for silence. Which brings us to tonight's primary agenda. Ms. Whitmore has prepared a comprehensive governance reform proposal. Dana. I stood, distributed copies of my proposal, and spent the next 40 minutes outlining a complete overhaul of Evandrel's compliance structure. Every weakness Chase had exploited would be closed. Every shortcut would be eliminated. Every voice that tried to raise concerns would be protected. This is radical, said Marcus Webb, one of the board's longest-serving members. Yes, I agreed. It is. It's also expensive. We're looking at, $5 million in implementation costs. $5.2 million in year one, but compare that to the potential SEC fines, shareholder lawsuits, and reputational damage if we don't act decisively. I pulled up my final slide. Gentlemen, ladies, you hired Chase Larkin to cut costs. He did that by cutting corners. You can hire someone else to do the same thing, or you can decide that integrity is a competitive advantage. The debate that followed was heated but brief. The institutional investors made their position clear: implement Dana's plan or watch them dump their shares. The board members who'd been wavering fell in line. Even Marcus Webb, after grumbling about costs, voted yes. Motion carried, Veronica announced. Ms. Whitmore, we'd like to offer you the position of Chief Compliance Officer, reporting directly to the board, with the authority to implement these reforms. I'd been expecting this, but it still felt surreal. I'll need certain guarantees, written into my contract, including protection from retaliation and a direct reporting line that bypasses the CEO. Whatever you need, Sandra said quickly, too quickly. They were more scared than they were letting on. As lawyers scrambled to draft agreements, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You think you've won? Wait until the Journal gets my side of the story. See. I showed it to Sandra, who immediately contacted our crisis communications team, but I wasn't worried about media spin anymore. The facts were the facts, documented and verified. Chase could tell whatever story he wanted, but numbers don't lie. The meeting concluded at 10:45 p.m. with my appointment confirmed and a press release scheduled for market open. As board members filed out, several stopped to shake my hand, the same people who'd watched in silence as Chase called me a typist. Linda Ray was the last to leave. Hell of a thing, she said. From typist to chief compliance officer in 2 weeks. I was never just a typist, I replied. No, she agreed, but he couldn't see that. Men like Chase never can. They see what they want to see until reality forces their eyes open. As I gathered my papers, Veronica approached. There's one more thing. Chase's termination agreement. He's refusing to sign unless we agree to a non-disparagement clause that goes both ways. Let him refuse. Without a signed agreement, he forfeits his severance. He'll sign. She smiled the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. You really did plan for everything, didn't you? Not everything, I admitted. I never planned on him being stupid enough to try hacking corporate systems. That was a gift. The building was quiet as I made my way to the elevator. This morning, I'd been an independent consultant. Tonight, I was Chief Compliance Officer with unprecedented authority and a mandate for reform. Chase Larkin had started this war, but I'd won it. My phone buzzed again as I reached my car. Another unknown number, but this time I recognized the area code. SEC headquarters in Washington. Ms. Whitmore, this is Special Agent David Park with the Division of Enforcement. We understand you have information relevant to our investigation of Evandrel Systems. Would tomorrow morning work for a conversation? I looked back at the building, its windows glowing against the Minneapolis night. Somewhere in the city, Chase Larkin was learning that corporate wars don't end with boardroom coups. They end with federal investigations. Tomorrow morning works perfectly, I told Agent Park. I'll bring documentation. The request came through Sandra Keene on a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after my appointment as Chief Compliance Officer. Chase wants to meet with you, privately. His lawyer says he's ready to discuss a resolution. I was in my new office, actually, Chase's old office, which I'd stripped of his power furniture and replaced with functional workspaces. The view was the same, but everything else had changed. Why me? I asked. He specifically requested you, says there are things he needs to say. Sandra hesitated. We advised against it, but he's insistent, and frankly, if it helps resolve the remaining litigation, I considered it. Chase had been remarkably quiet since the SEC opened their investigation. No more threatening texts, no media appearances, no desperate plays. Maybe he'd finally accepted reality. Fine, but it happens here, in my office, and I want security nearby. The meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. the following Tuesday. I spent the morning reviewing the latest forensic findings. Chase's financial manipulations went deeper than we'd initially thought, involving offshore accounts and shell companies. The SEC was building a case that could result in criminal charges. He arrived precisely on time, escorted by security to my office. The man who walked in looked nothing like the golden boy who'd humiliated me 6 weeks ago. His designer suit was gone, replaced by khakis and a polo shirt. He'd lost weight. The arrogance had been replaced by something I couldn't quite identify. Dana. He stood awkwardly by the door until I gestured to a chair. Thank you for seeing me. I remained behind my desk, his old desk. Your lawyer said you wanted to discuss a resolution. That's what I told him, but really. He sat down heavily. I wanted to apologize. I said nothing. In negotiations, silence is often the most powerful response. I know what you think of me, he continued. Arrogant, destructive, criminal, probably, and you're not wrong, but I need you to understand something. I'm listening. He leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw vulnerability in his eyes. When I came to Evandrel, I was hired to do exactly what I did: cut costs, boost short-term profits, make the numbers look good for a potential acquisition. The board knew some of them. Anyway, they wanted a hatchet man. And the financial manipulation started before me. I just refined it, made it harder to detect, or so I thought. He laughed bitterly. I actually thought I was smarter than everyone else, especially the compliance department, especially you. Because I was just a typist. He flinched. I've been in rooms where showing weakness gets you eaten alive, where admitting someone else might be right is career suicide. I looked at you and saw someone who could expose everything I was trying to hide, so I diminished you. Publicly, brutally. You weren't the first, I said. You won't be the last. But you were ready for me. It wasn't a question. 2 years. You sat on that audit for 2 years, waiting for the right moment. I was waiting for the right evidence. Your ego provided the moment. He nodded slowly. I've lost everything. My career, my reputation, probably my freedom once the SEC is done. My wife took the kids to her mother's in Connecticut. Says she can't be married to someone who makes the news for fraud. I felt a flicker of sympathy but pushed it down. He'd made choices. Those choices had consequences. What do you want from me? Chase. I want to make a deal. Full cooperation with the SEC. Complete disclosure of everyone involved, and yes, it goes higher than me. In exchange, I need a letter from you, from the Chief Compliance Officer, stating that you found no evidence I acted alone, that the systemic issues predated my arrival. You want me to soften the blow? I want you to tell the truth, which is that I was hired to be exactly what I was. The board got what they paid for until you made it too expensive to continue. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. His eyes widened as he recognized it, the original $37 discrepancy report that had started everything. The truth, I said, is that you had a choice. When you arrived at Avandrel, you could have exposed the existing problems, cleaned house, built something legitimate. Instead, you made it worse. You didn't just continue the fraud, you perfected it. I did what I was hired to do. No, you did what was easy, what was profitable, what fed your ego. I slid the report across the desk. This is where it started. $37. Any competent executive would have seen it for what it was, a symptom of larger problems. You saw it as an opportunity. He stared at the paper. So no letter. I'll write a letter. It will say that the financial irregularities at Avandrel were systemic and predated your tenure. It will also say that under your leadership, these irregularities evolved from simple misallocation to sophisticated fraud, that you had multiple opportunities to correct course and chose instead to accelerate the deception, that when confronted with evidence, your response was to attack the messenger rather than address the message. That's not what I need, but it's what you're going to get, because it's the truth. I stood, signaling the meeting was over. You called me a typist. Chase, what you never understood is that typists create the record. We document history as it happens, and the history shows that you could have been the hero of this story. Instead, you chose to be its villain. He stood slowly, looking older than his 38 years. I really am sorry, for what it's worth. It's worth something, I admitted. Not enough to change what happened, but something. At the door, he turned back. The Wall Street Journal wants an interview. My lawyer says I shouldn't. But what would you do? I'd tell the truth, all of it, take responsibility, name names, show genuine remorse. I met his eyes. Be the man you could have been when you first walked into this building. He nodded once and left. I never saw him again. Though I followed the news. He did the interview, and it was brutal in its honesty. He implicated 3 board members and 2 previous CFOs. He detailed the entire fraud, taking responsibility for his part while exposing the system that had enabled it. The SEC gave him a deal 5 years instead of 20, plus fines that would consume whatever assets his wife hadn't already claimed. The 3 board members resigned. Avandrel's stock took a hit, but recovered once the market realized we were serious about reform. 6 months later, I received a letter forwarded from the federal prison in Minnesota. Chase's handwriting was careful, precise. Dana. The typist was right. Documentation matters. Truth matters. I'm teaching accounting to other inmates now, trying to make sure they don't make my mistakes. Thank you for the lesson. Chase. I filed the letter in my personal archives. Another document for the record. Another piece of evidence that even the most arrogant executives can learn. It just sometimes takes a federal conviction to drive the lesson home. 3 years later, I stood on the balcony of my office at Whitmore Advisory Group, watching the Minneapolis skyline change colors in the setting sun. The coffee in my hand had gone cold, but I didn't mind. I was thinking about transformation, how a $37 discrepancy had led to this moment. My consulting firm occupied the top floor of a boutique building in the North Loop, close enough to the financial district to be convenient, but far enough to maintain independence. We specialized in compliance restructuring for companies that had lost their way. Business was, unfortunately, excellent. The phone on my desk buzzed. My assistant's voice came through the speaker. Dana, Veronica Halden on line 1. I smiled. Veronica had retired from Avandrel's board after the reforms were fully implemented, but kept in touch. She'd become something of a mentor, though she insisted she learned as much from me as I did from her. Veronica, how's retirement treating you? Boring as hell, she laughed. Which is why I'm calling. I'm joining the board of a tech startup in Austin. They're growing fast, playing loose with regulations. Sound familiar? Painfully familiar. They need someone to build their compliance infrastructure from scratch. Interested in a challenge. I looked at the framed document on my wall, the original $37 discrepancy report. Now a reminder that small things matter. Below it hung a photo from last year's compliance conference where I'd given the keynote on the hidden costs of cutting corners. Send me the details. I'll take a look. I knew you would. Oh, and Dana, their CEO, is 29. Harvard MBA. Thinks he's God's gift to business. Another Chase Larkin. Maybe. Or maybe someone who can learn before it costs him everything. After we hung up, I returned to the balcony. The sun was lower now, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere out there, in offices and boardrooms, people were making decisions. Some would choose integrity, others would choose expedience, and a few would learn. Too late. That the person documenting their choices might be more powerful than they imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda Ray. Just got a call from the DOJ. Remember that pharmaceutical company we flagged last year? They're ready to move forward with the investigation. Dinner tomorrow to discuss. I typed back, usual place, 7 p.m. The Evandrel case had changed everything, not just for me, but for how companies thought about compliance. The era of dismissing oversight as bureaucratic interference was ending. Boards were asking harder questions. Executives were thinking twice before burying bad news. And somewhere in a federal facility, Chase Larkin was teaching accounting to inmates, a living reminder of what happened when ambition exceeded ethics. I'd received offers over the years, chief compliance officer positions at Fortune 500 companies, partnership tracks at major consulting firms, even a government position with the SEC. I'd turned them all down. Whitmore Advisory Group gave me something more valuable than a corner office or a 7-figure salary, the freedom to choose my battles. The doorbell chimed, indicating the last employee had left for the day. I gathered my things, taking one last look at the office I'd built from the settlement money and consulting fees. Every client we took on, every fraud we uncovered, every system we strengthened, it all traced back to that moment when Chase Larkin looked across a conference table and called me a typist. He'd meant it as an insult, a way to diminish and dismiss. Instead, he'd given me a gift, the crystallizing moment when I realized that those who document truth hold more power than those who try to bury it. As I locked the office and headed for the elevator, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. Another company in crisis. Another executive who'd thought the rules didn't apply. Another board scrambling for damage control. Whitmore Advisory Group, I answered. How can we help you? Because that's what we did now. We helped companies find their way back from the brink, one documented truth at a time. And if occasionally that meant taking down executives who confused arrogance with leadership, well, that was just a bonus. The elevator descended, carrying me from my palace in the sky back to street level. But I wasn't the same woman who'd been escorted out of Evandrel with a visitor's badge 3 years ago. I was Dana Whitmore, the typist who'd typed her way to the top, one carefully documented report at a time. And I was just getting started. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and redemption. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of how a typist brought down a CEO, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Dana's position? Let me know in the comments.